Alrighty, so I want to welcome on Tim Willard. Tim is a good friend of mine. He works for European Cellars. He is the manager of the Eastern side of things.
Yeah, Eastern regional manager. We have two people on the East Coast. So I have a colleague in the Mid-Atlantic and DC, Virginia area, and between the two of us, we run sales on the East Coast.
Awesome. So Tim is a advanced level sommelier. Take us through what that means. Take us through kind of the different levels and what that means.
Yeah, there's a couple different certification bodies. The two pinnacle sort of terminal degrees are Master of Wine or Master Sommelier. So I went through the Court of Master Sommeliers, which is a little more based in the food and beverage or service industry. If you're in that profession, that's generally what you go through is Court of Master. And so there's 4 levels. The 3rd level is advanced, and then the next level would be Master Sommelier. And I haven't sat for that exam, but the process is really pretty amazing. It sort of forces you to study the whole world of wine, geography, history, politics, religion, culture. All of these things have followed the history of the human race and wine. And so it gave me perspective that's so much bigger than just a wine certification, which has been, I think, the most rewarding part.
So it's pretty crazy because I don't know if it does a good job of depicting what it's actually like, but I watched the Netflix documentary Somm.
Yeah.
And I was completely floored by what you just said, like the depth of knowledge and understanding. And it is considered one of the hardest, if not the hardest exam in the world for the Master Sommelier.
Yeah, I think between, probably Master of Wine and Master Sommelier, the numbers, the pass rate is probably lower than most exams. Now, that's also, there's a lot less people trying to pass the Master Sommelier exam than there are maybe trying to get their, MD or something like that. So, but it is a very intense exam, and it does, it forces you to learn connections that are outside of just memorizing facts and details.
Right. So take us through real quick, because I just find this stuff totally interesting, and talking to you, and I've gone to a few different events of yours, and just talking to you as a friend, I find it fascinating. All of the depth and knowledge that goes into just understanding one wine, let alone an entire world of wines. But for the dumbed down person, explain it to me like I'm 5. Like, what is it that you do day to day, or what somebody with an advanced level sommelier might do?
Yeah, so currently I've transitioned out of the restaurant world, which I sort of grew up in. I started washing dishes when I was 14 and worked through the kitchens and then through the front of the house and bartending and serving, and then into management and beverage program directing and that sort of thing. And then I transitioned into the import side, or what we call the supply side, which is bringing wines in from Europe or other countries into the US, and then working with distributor partners across the US to get those wines into the hands of retailers and restaurants. And so currently it's a sales gig. You could substitute any unit of sale that you wanted. It could be bicycles or staplers, or it just happens to be wine for me. So I break down Excel sheets, but I get to use my expense account to take people out for dinners and taste wines and really engage with consumers on a level that's quite a bit different than other sales or importing, because on the import side, we get to link not only with our distributor partners, but then directly with the consumers that are buying from our retailers and stuff like that. So that's my current life.
Right.
Life as a sommelier, especially when you're studying, there's 3 parts to the exam. There's a written theory exam. There's a service exam where you actually master sommeliers 2 or 3 to a table. You have 4 tables set up in the room, and they give you mock scenarios at each of the different tables and put you through your paces. They'll ask you to recite the ingredients for classic cocktails, so it's not just wine. They'll ask you about certain vintages and whether it's a good vintage or a bad vintage, or what the characteristics of the vintage were, even if it's 30 years ago. And then they'll take you, they might even give you a menu and say, hey, here's 5 dishes. And they'll give you certain parameters for pairing. You need to use an Italian red, a fortified wine, a beer that's from a local microbrewery, and come up with these 5 pairings and then defend them in front of the table. So that's part of the exam. And then I think the hardest part is the blind tasting exam. So you actually have 6 wines, 3 red and 3 white, and you have 25 minutes to break them down very specifically by the color, the aromatics, the flavor profile, the structure of the wines, the acidity and the tannin. But then you also have to name the village that it's from, the region, the country, and then the vintage that it's from. And so it's to learn the parameters for fitting wines into those boxes takes a lot of practice.
So this is what fascinates me is, I mean, you're a historian, you're a linguist, you're an economist, but you're also an expert in not just one type of wine, but every different type of variety out there. And what the thing that fascinates me the most is like, how do you even like train your brain and your senses to understand that? Like, is there a methodology to actually train yourself to do that?
I think that's the biggest part that people don't understand. There's a methodology just like anything else. I mean, it blows my mind to watch people like you and the control you have over your body and the knowledge that you have about which muscles work to make different movements happen. And that's something that lay people don't have. I mean, when somebody tells me to push my shoulders back and down, I might have to try 3 times before I sort of know what I'm doing.
Sure.
You guys have that intimate knowledge because you've studied all the pathways of neurons,
That's a good point.
all of that. And so we do that, but we're also given certain parameters. So you could almost think of it like muscle groups, right? So there's only a specific amount of wines that are considered testable. So if you've got, let's say, Pinot Noir, and it's from South America, that generally wouldn't be given as a blind tasting example. Because if we're going to taste Pinot Noir, it's either going to be from Burgundy, its true home, or it might be from California or a couple other places in the world that are considered classic. Gotcha. So we can it's almost an exclusion. Like, what can we exclude? We can block out all these different parts of the world and just focus on the core group that we know that we have to have studied and sort of dialed in. And then you train your palate through the receptors, through science, really.
Right.
All of us are humans. We all taste the same way, but getting that fine tuning, it's sort of like hearing tone in music. You start banging around on a guitar and anybody can play a G chord, right?
Sure.
But if you hear your favorite guitarist, they can hit one note and you can say, that's Derek Trucks or that's Eric Clapton, because there's a sound that is very true to them.
Yeah.
And so tuning your palate into wine that says, hey, that's Tempranillo from Rioja, Spain. And I know it because there's a structure and a tone to that wine that it couldn't be anything else, or it might only be able to be 1 or 2 other things.
Right.
And I'm going to hedge my bet with it could be this or this, but I think it's Rioja.
That is an awesome analogy. That actually like really put it in perspective for me. That's really good, man. I love that.
Yeah.
So, which kind of makes me think, that obviously there's a lot of repetition involved in that, and tasting and iterating and figuring out and, testing with friends. But what you said that was really interesting to me is that like we all taste the same way, which I guess I never really thought about that, because I've always assumed that like we all have different sensations tied to different memories. But I guess at its core, like we are really truly tasting the same thing, but you have to train yourself in order to be able to taste that. And so like, do you do that algorithmically, or like how does that process work?
So really getting involved with one, having a mentor or a coach, I think, is the most important thing. Someone that's more experienced and knows more than you.
Yeah.
And then signing up through one of these bodies. Like for me, it was Court of Masters, Sommeliers. The Master of Wine is called WSET or WSET. Going through one of these organizations, they give you some parameters for study and they give you some vocabulary. So another good analogy is like, yes, we do all taste the same way. You could also say everyone swings a bat the same way, right?
Sure.
But the people that swing a bat really well, if you get down to the very precise mechanics of that swing or a golf swing,
Sure.
It's not really the same. So it's really about fine tuning what we're tasting and smelling, and then putting vocabulary with that. So I like to think about scales when I taste, from sort of light to rich or low to high. And so tannin in red wine is a good one. If you just taste one wine every once in a while and you swish it around and your cheeks get a little dry, right? You say, oh, there's some tannin there. That's structure. If you start to taste wine deliberately, every time you taste a wine with tannin, you feel how much dryness you feel in your cheeks. And then you put it on that scale. Is this right in the middle? Is this moderate tannin? Or is this a little bit higher or a little bit lower? And after you taste 3,000 wines, you can sort of say, this is low tannin. And as soon as you know that the tannin is low, there's a certain group of varieties or grapes that fit into low tannin. And so that can inform your decision just based on one factor.
Fascinating. I love that you're putting this in like jock terms for me.
Well, I'm kind of a jock too, so it works for me.
It's great analogies. But I think one thing that you're hitting on, that, and this is something that just always fascinates me about humans, is whether it be, and I'll use my own jock analogy, like a golf swing. It is absolutely fascinating to me that we as humans can take a ball, look at a target several hundred yards away, and with very little consciousness be able to translate the ability to get that ball into that target and be able to do it with relative accuracy. But all of that, again, coming from just thousands and thousands and thousands of repetitions, to where your brain and your body are just seamlessly communicating to each other. And I guess it's what you're saying is the same process of thousands of repetitions of tasting and just training your brain. And it's just amazing how much RAM or memory that the brain has to be able to store that and synthesize it and be able to, like you said, like make it so obvious to you. Like, and then, you know, or it can only be that. Like, this is fascinating to me.
Yeah. And let's take that analogy one step further, right? And let's think about when you're having a really good day or a really bad day on the course. You know, when you hit 3 great shots, you start to feel good, but then you also start to get in your head, right? Like, oh man, am I going to be able to keep this up? Or you hit 3 bad shots and you're like, am I the worst golfer ever? And you know, I'm going to get into this funk. And it's when we get into our heads and we stop letting that natural connection of brain and body work the way that it should, that's when we start to make mistakes. And the same thing, I've seen people in blind tastings, you know, it's very nerve-wracking. You're always doing it in front of your peers. You're using kind of weird words to describe very specific fruits and the peel or the pith of fruit and, you know, different things. And it's nerve-wracking, and there's a lot of intensity. And I've seen people just start off really knocking out, you know, exactly the characteristics of this wine. And then when it's time to make a decision, they just totally crumble and their head gets the best of them.
Right.
And we've seen it happen in every sport.
And you see that, in probably all facets of sport, or, you know, whether it be
or like the guys that are the best on the team in practice but can't get it together for a game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, some of the best players that I played with at University of Vermont were guys that never saw a minute of playtime because they got in their heads during the game.
Yeah, and that's where that clutch gene comes in.
Yeah.
You know, did you, and this is going to be a little tangential, but did you watch the documentary about Alex Honnold, Free Solo, the climber who
I've read a lot about it, but I have not
got to
watched it.
watch it because it is like the perfect embodiment of somebody who is able to completely block out that mental aspect of
Yeah.
getting in his own way, and he just trusts his body, and he's able to harness flow much more seamlessly than you or I might be able to. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're hitting on is sort of this sense of flow, which um, it's that, again, that seamless connection between brain and body that just happens, which
Yeah. For me, when it happens, and it was rare in my college career, but when it happened and I could actually let it happen,
yeah,
there was no better feeling in the world. You know, people talk
yeah,
about being in the zone. Usually when it would start to happen for me, I would almost get scared of it or nervous. And I think the best
yeah,
athletes, when
yeah.
it starts to happen, it's like you were saying, they're able to say, oh, this is happening. I'm going to put everything else. I'm just going to let it go. And sometimes I think our biggest fear is actually being better than we believe we are.
Ooh, that's deep.
Yeah,
Well,
sorry.
but take it there. Well, you're right. I mean, you look at like the best athletes all time: Phelps, Jordan, Tiger, even Lance Armstrong. I mean,
Yep.
those were people that could get in that state and
Hmm.
just completely thrive off of that. And that's
Yeah,
what's
exactly.
so fascinating. But let's get to your, because I do want to talk about sport and I want to talk about your athletic kind of endeavors too. But I want to kind of rapid fire few quick questions about.
Yeah.
Hang on one second. We're getting a call. Um, we'll let it go. So tell me real quick, rapid fire. What is something you're really excited about in the wine industry right now?
I think the change from when I studied wine to pass tests is that it was very hierarchical in terms of you had these classic producers and everybody was striving to be just like these classic producers. And
Yeah.
you only had to know wines from certain boundary boxes, like the important regions.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's more of this artistry where these young producers, my age and younger, in their 30s, late 20s even sometimes, and they're finding really good raw material, whether that's the soil that it's grown on, the age of the vines, and really just from their hometowns, they're saying, hey, I can make something great right here. And so the whole premise, it's a paradigm shift of what I grew up studying, where now these young producers, anywhere they can get their hands on really good raw material, they're making world-class wine from places we've never heard of.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Talk real quick about, and you had touched on this in your virtual tasting, the two, were they brothers who were, were kind of the laughing stock, who are like
Yeah.
doing biodynamics, and now everybody's coming to it. Is that kind of what you're referencing when you're talking about this?
Yeah, so biodynamics is a specific type of farming, and it's way too much for us to discuss right now, but it's a very integrated type of farming where the whole farm is thought of as a single organism. So all of your decisions are made for the better of the whole farm, not just for better grapes. It's better dirt. You usually raise animals. You usually have polyculture, so other types of crops, whether it's other fruits or wheat or something like that. And biodynamics and organics, we're just getting to the point where science can start to prove that the nutrient loads in the fruit are actually better and more nourishing for our bodies than conventionally grown fruit. The only thing that science can prove right now is that it's generally better for the land in general because of less inputs of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides.
Right.
But for me personally, biodynamics really, there's an energy function, almost like the energy we were talking about, that flow. They work on a lunar calendar on the phases of the moon to make their decisions
Right.
for harvesting and farming. But when you taste biodynamic wines, and not everyone, but there's a brightness and an energy to these wines. I've got to taste, I taste 100 wines a week sometimes. There is something different with biodynamics in the final wine if it's done right. Now, there's also massive companies that can pay for certifications and follow the rules of biodynamics, and maybe their wine doesn't taste like that much energy or, you know, different. So, yeah.
That's cool. Other quick question. Tell me how, and this is maybe a negative spin, but how is the industry going to change because of COVID?
I think we're learning a lot. I think the hardest part right now is the transition for all of our friends and family in the restaurant business, what in our world we call on-premise, where sales are happening sort of, you know, open bottles being poured at the place. A lot of small importers, you know, we have a pretty healthy mix of off-premise, which is retail shops, and on-premise, which is restaurants. But some are really set up just specifically for restaurant sales. And those are being hit the hardest right now. And obviously our friends in the restaurants are being hit really, really hard, trying to make it by with to-go service and that sort of thing. So that will be a big change. I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of restaurateurs that decide it's just not worth it to come back, because the margins are pretty small in the restaurant world, especially if you're independent with just one location. So
you're doing something pretty cool right now, though. You know, I've seen you kind of pivot where you're doing these virtual tastings, and I was on yours last week, and it was just, I got a kick out of it, man. Not only did we taste wine, but you had live music. You had on a friend who was the head of his wine program at his restaurant, and the game you played with them killed me. But just talk about that. And like, I mean, you had 85 computers, but there were groups of 5, 6 people. So you probably had upwards of 150 people on that call. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, you know, I've never felt in my life like I had a driving passion. You know, like I've always wanted to like have that like artist that like couldn't put their guitar down. Music, whether they were living out of a car or a cardboard box, like music was their thing, you know. Or maybe it's art, maybe it's a paint on canvas, maybe it's writing. I never had that. I think I did. It's always been people. And so for me, the connection of wine and people, it's one of the oldest connections we have as a human race. And so instead of just focusing on wine or sales, I've tried to craft these virtual tastings to be more about community and connection. And it's really been resounding, overwhelming in terms of how it's resonating with people, and having a musical guest who may not be into wine at all, talk about wine with us and just be human. To have a guy like Neil McCarthy, who runs arguably the best restaurant in Atlanta at Miller Union, just come in and be a real person. I mean, I got more comments from people that didn't know Neil that said, man, I really want to have a drink with that guy sometime.
No kidding. Yeah.
And so, you know, it's just, I think that the backdrop of wine is the vehicle to sort of connect and just be human with each other. We can't do that in a bar or even at our own houses with our friends unless you're roommates. So I think the most successful part of the tastings has been that we've almost created that atmosphere of hanging out in a group with people. And the chat function, I don't know if you followed the chat, but I mean, it's wild, the banter that's going on around the conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was one of my more favorite things about the tasting itself, was that, you know, I don't know much about wine. And I could just get on and just like casually enjoy a drink and have you explain it, and then get some music and follow along with the chat feature where people are kind of engaging. It was just really, really cool to kind of be a part of that. So the way you've been doing that is really awesome. So I want to pivot here a minute, and we'll just spend a few minutes. Tell me kind of your athletic background. Tell me a little bit about sports you grew up playing, and then bring it to current day, and then sort of with we'll kind of wrap up with, you know, how all of this all ties together. So
yeah, sure. Growing up, I started playing soccer when I was really young. I think I begged my way on to practice with my brother's team when I was 4, when I was too young to really play. And and stuck with soccer my whole career. I played a little baseball, I played some basketball, but really soccer. And I took that through to the Division I level in college in the America East Conference at University of Vermont. And then I played a little bit of semi-pro in the PDL, sort of the third or fourth division of U.S. soccer under MLS. So I did that for a few years, and then I I moved to Charleston. There was an A-League team, which was a step or two above where I was playing.
Yeah.
I was getting a little older, and I decided not to try out, and I decided to get a master's degree. So I did that, stayed in the restaurant business the whole time I pursued my master's. And by the time I had finished, I had started to catch the wine bug and decided that all the jobs I was applying for with my master's, I wasn't really interested in taking. And that was the transition that happened to get me really into wine. I started working at a restaurant that let me start to take over the list and offered to pay for my wine education.
Yeah. So you've kind of been dabbling in the past few months and tries, and you do cycling, you're a runner, you've gotten into swimming in the past year or two. But it's interesting that, you can take a sport like soccer and take it to, the top 1 percentile of all people in the US who play soccer. And through that, I mean, you developed a pretty amazing engine. And I'm going to brag on you for a minute. You ran a 5K recently in under 18 minutes, right?
Yeah, broke 18. Felt pretty good to do that.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So talk about that. Talk about sort of your transition into running, and then sort of how you got into like triathlons now.
Yeah. So triathlons have always been, for me, almost like blind tasting for a normal human, like almost mythical. Like, oh, I could never do that, and I wouldn't even know where to get started. So, I'll never do it, but I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And then I had a buddy, so I hung up my cleats. I stopped playing men's league and co-ed leagues just because I was starting to get nervous about injury. Injury in soccer as you get older is pretty prominent. And so I started running, and then I just had a buddy text me that he was going to do this sprint triathlon. And I hadn't ridden a bike since my GT Performer that had pegs on the front and the back when I was like 12, I mean, really no biking at all. So I bought an old steel frame Nishiki, and I started training with my buddy, and we did this sprint. And it was this overwhelming feeling of athleticism and, being totally spent and burnt out, but in the best possible way. And I just decided I had to do it again. And shortly after that, I met you in person. You signed me up for the Swim Across America swim. So I went from doing a 600-meter swim in a sprint triathlon to a 5K swim a couple months later, which was
wild.
Big change of pace for me, but really for you, getting form and function, understanding the intricacies of how bodies move in the water and how important form is. Really fell in love with swimming and upgraded my bike, and most recently signed up with coaches, which truthfully has brought me just to a whole new level. I'm with Endurance Concepts right now, a guy named Chris Douglas and Cody Elderton, and the coaching specifically from Chris has just been, it has brought me to levels that I didn't think I'd ever be able to get to. And unfortunately, swimming's out right now.
I know, it's killing me. Yeah.
But really looking forward to getting back into the pool with you because, we talked so much about precision and technique and form. And I think certainly in running and biking, I've honed in on that form way more than I ever thought possible.
Right.
But with swimming, I think it's an exponential factor. It's almost like a golf swing.
Yeah.
You have to remember to breathe. You have to remember what your head position is. You have to remember to move your feet and your hands at the same time and in very specific motions if you want to do it right. So,
and that is kind of bringing it back to the state of flow. What I love about endurance sports, and probably what you're finding too, and what you kind of alluded to was it's just you against yourself and you
Yeah.
against your head. And when you do find that state of flow, and it's really interesting. There's been, only a handful of occasions in my life where I've truly gotten there.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about those times is that it didn't start out great.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like you kind of hit a point of where you are really hurt, and then like something in you can kind of flip and switch, and then you can kind of find yourself in that state of flow where you're like, I don't even know how much time has passed. But
Yeah.
I'm going and going and going. And that is like that connection between, like, for me, body and water is just like, it's unlike anything, man.
I think there's two things for me that have really changed as an athlete through this coaching. One is having a coach. I've realized that I don't have to go out and kill myself every day, and actually realizing that that's worse. So having days where you focus on taking it easy and focus on form and taking it easy, that's been the biggest thing, because I've never worked out so much in my life over the last 15 weeks that I've been with Chris and Cody. I've also never been in less pain or with less injury because my form has been such a focus. And then the second is that mental acuity that you're talking about. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that when I'm hurting, I need to pick my head up a little bit, pick my chin up and say, hey, I'm out here doing this and I'm going to enjoy it. And just switching to that positive mentality in your head, all of a sudden the pain diminishes a little bit, and you find this lift, and your form, and really just going back to form. There's times where I'm in pain and I start to feel my hips give out, and I can feel my form, and I'm trudging and I'm pounding my feet on the pavement, and I can just pick my head up and put my shoulders back a little bit and say, hey, let's do this the right way. And all of a sudden your pace is better, it's less painful, and you're right back on track.
And I again, this is just another one of those, like, what's just fascinating to me about the human body and the human organism is, to what you said, embracing the suck, so to speak, but being able to truly flip a switch on kind of on a decision, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there are certain points where you can wear your body down so much to where that's not possible, but for the most part, it is possible. And learning, but that again, that comes with repetitions and training and
absolutely
understanding of what you're doing to know. I was talking with my little brother this week, who's a Division I swimmer, and we were talking about how cool it is that, like, your perception and your understanding of time is so incredible that, like, your body just knows what you're doing at all times.
Yeah.
Like, when you're running a pace, you know exactly what pace you're running, and your body just knows it. And I think that this is just, like, these types of things just encapsulate, like, how incredible the human organism is. And so I guess in wrapping up and sort of tying in the level of detail that you know about wine, and how sharp your senses are, and how I would call you sort of an elite runner, and getting there with the try aspect of things. How do all of these things kind of tie together for you, and sort of what, and I don't know, this is maybe more of a vague question, but, like, how do those things kind of feed into each other, or do they for you?
Yeah, I think that they really do. And I think this notion of sort of wholeness that I think younger generations are starting to embrace more than my generation did. For me, I grew up in a blue collar family that if you could work every day and not miss work for any reason and make enough money to put food on the table and get your kids through school, that was as good as life got.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to sort of blend more of the arts into our life, and more self-care. And so for me, when I work out and I get to engage people when I get to say one thing about wine that sets a light bulb off for one person, when I can incorporate all those aspects of my life together in a day or in a week successfully, there's an inner feeling, there's an inner energy that just feels right and good that I've done
Yeah.
I've lived up to my potential. And so, I'm 40 years old, and to be feeling that for one of the first times in my life where I do have passion, I am able to pursue both work and hobby, I guess, through sport, but also wellness through being in shape. It's really just an amazing feeling. So I would say they tie in 100%, more so now than they ever have before in my life.
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said, I think we're all just trying to reach our potential.
Yeah.
I think that when you're doing different things, that you're challenging yourself mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever that may be, that you are actually hitting your stride from a potential standpoint, and then also unlocking potential, realizing once you do that, you realize, oh, I'm capable of more. So,
and I think, just to speak to what you guys do at Functionize, and to coaching in general, education's always been a huge thing for me, because I've had the luxury of having mentors and educators that knew so much more than me. And I try to do that to give back now. Just recently, I've given myself the opportunity to engage coaches for my personal benefit again as an adult.
Right.
And man, the payoff is exponential to any time you can put in on your own. And so I couldn't urge people more that if you're struggling with something, if you want to get better at something, and if you have the resources, even if you don't have the resources, I will help anyone that I can.
Totally.
There are people out there that, yes, they probably charge money for their services, but they can also point you to resources that are free or give up some of their time for free. So be a squeaky wheel, ask for help, and watch yourself grow in ways that you never could have imagined through using a coach or a mentor or an educator that has more experience than you.
The squeaky wheel gets the grease. And yeah, you're right. I think what I have also found to be true is that in general, people who are passionate about something want to share that with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
So I love when I can help somebody. You love when you can help somebody. And people are willing to help. So sometimes we just have to ask for that. So I guess in wrapping up, just tell me, how we can support you, how we can support other people in your industry, and drop some information there for us.
Yeah, I think the easiest way, if you're on Instagram at twillard06, I always post the links to my tastings. I'm always partnering with local retail shops. The local retail shops are now spreading across the country that are supporting this. So you're supporting local retailers everywhere that have been, sort of hamstrung to curbside pickup only. So following me there, or if you want to email me, tim@europeancellars.com. With any wine questions, you can even if you're at a restaurant, you can take a pic of the, once we can go back to restaurants, take a pic of the wine list and I'll tell you what to get.
Real time.
But yeah, email me or follow me on Instagram, and you can get information for the tastings. And then I think the best way to support people in my industry is to just keep pushing your boundaries with wine, and don't buy the same bottle over and over again. It's a big world out there. You wouldn't hang the same piece of art all over your house. So feel the same way about wine. Push your own boundaries. Even if you get something you don't like, think about what it is that you don't like about it, so that you can verbalize that the next time and find wines that are more in your zone.
It's awesome. Well, we'll link your information. We'll post this here in a little bit. And thanks for coming on and just chatting with me. I hope you and the family are well, and we'll we got to keep pushing forward, man.
Yeah, I can't wait to catch up soon. Thanks so much for having me, Jake. Great to talk with you.
Yep. See you, man.